A 40-year-old woman in a worn-out hoodie brought a relic rifle to an elite sniper range. The recruits snickered, betting she couldn't hit the broad side of a barn. They stopped laughing when one shot pierced 3 separate targets. The wind at Fort Holloway, Nevada, had a personality. It wasn't a gentle breeze, it was a physical presence, a bully that scoured the landscape, kicking up dust and rattling the corrugated steel roofs of the barracks. This was a place bleached of all softness, a monochrome world of rock, sand, and punishing sun. It was home to the U.S. Army's most advanced sniper selection program, a crucible designed to forge the most precise human weapons on the planet. Into this world of hardened discipline and cutting-edge technology rattled a 1998 Ford Ranger. The truck's original blue paint had surrendered to the sun, peeling in patches to reveal a primer gray skeleton. It coughed to a stop in the visitor's lot, looking profoundly out of place next to the rows of matte black government SUVs and aggressive-looking pickup trucks owned by the instructors. The driver's door creaked open and a woman emerged. Elena Rivas was 40, though the fatigue etched around her eyes made her look older. She wore a faded gray hoodie with a barely legible University of Texas logo, jeans with a small tear in one knee, and worn-out work boots. She looked less like a visitor to a high-security military installation and more like a mom who had taken a wrong turn on her way to soccer practice. Her movements were quiet, almost hesitant, as she walked to the truck bed and retrieved a long, cloth-wrapped object. As she approached the entrance to the long-distance range, a knot of recruits, all in their early 20s and radiating the cocksure arrogance of the young and gifted, paused their conversation. Their leader was Caleb Jensen, a recruit whose preternatural eyesight and steady hand had earned him the nickname Eagle Eye. He was the star of his class, and he knew it. "Well, look what we have here," Caleb muttered, a smirk playing on his lips. "Lost, ma'am?" His friends chuckled. "Probably looking for the commissary," another one chimed in. "It's 2 miles that way, ma'am. They have a great sale on fabric softener." Elena ignored them, her gaze fixed on the range. She unwrapped her cargo, revealing an M21 rifle. It was an old weapon, a Vietnam-era design, but it was immaculately maintained. The wooden stock was dark and smooth, worn down in specific places from years of contact with a cheek and shoulder. The steel of the barrel had a deep, non-reflective finish. It wasn't a museum piece, it was a tool, cared for by a master craftsman. The recruits didn't see the care. They saw its age. "Whoa, check out the fossil," one of them laughed. "Did you borrow that from your grandpa?" Caleb leaned against a railing, crossing his arms. "I'll tell you what. If she can hit a 100-meter target with that thing, I'll scrub the latrines for the entire platoon for a month. With my own toothbrush." A young lieutenant, the officer on duty, strode over, his expression a mixture of irritation and official procedure. "Ma'am, this is a restricted live-fire area. I need to see your authorization." His tone was dismissive, his eyes scanning her as if she were a mild security threat he'd have to waste paperwork on. Elena simply handed him a laminated card. It was a temporary range access pass, signed by the base commander. The lieutenant's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but the signature was undeniable. He handed it back, his posture stiffening slightly. "My apologies, ma'am." What are you here for?" "I just want to feel it again," Elena said, her voice quiet, almost raspy from disuse. "It's been a while." She walked past the still smirking recruits and took a position at an open firing lane. As she laid the M21 on the shooting bench, a change began to ripple through her. The tired slump in her shoulders straightened. The hesitant look in her eyes vanished, replaced by an intense, diamond-hard focus as she stared downrange. She placed a single, heavy-caliber round onto the loading tray, her fingers moving with an economy and certainty that was hypnotic. She didn't check the wind with a fancy digital meter, she simply raised a wetted finger, her eyes half closing as she processed the invisible currents. The laughter died in Caleb Jensen's throat. The woman who had shuffled past them like a ghost was gone. In her place stood a predator. Something ancient and dangerous had just woken up, and the wind itself seemed to hold its breath. The target array at the 300-meter line was a monument to arrogance. It wasn't the standard, paper and wood qualification setup. Caleb and his friends, bored with routine drills, had created a trick shot gallery to show off. 3 circular steel plates, each the size of a dinner plate, were positioned at starkly different angles and elevations. The first was set square to the shooter. The second was 5 feet to the right and 2 feet higher, angled at 45 degrees. The third was another 7 feet left of the second, and a foot lower, angled back towards the shooter. The setup was a ballistic puzzle. Hitting all 3 was simple enough, with 3 separate, carefully aimed shots. Hitting them with 1 bullet was a fantasy, a bar trick discussed over beers. The physics were a nightmare. Any ricochet would deform the bullet, robbing it of its stability and energy, sending it tumbling uselessly into the dirt. To chain all 3 together required a level of calculation that seemed beyond human ability. It was a joke, a challenge designed to be impossible. Elena settled behind the M21. She didn't use a modern scope with mil-dots and windage turrets. Her rifle was topped with simple iron sights, a primitive notch-and-post system that most of the recruits had only ever seen in training manuals. She ignored the padded shooting mat, instead pressing her shoulder firmly into the rifle's stock, becoming one solid unit of bone, muscle, and wood. Her breathing slowed until it was almost imperceptible. The world seemed to shrink, the wind, the distant sounds of the base, the gawking soldiers, all of it dissolving until only she, the rifle, and the distant targets existed. Caleb watched, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. He was the eagle eye. He understood what it took to make a 300-meter shot. He understood the variables: wind, humidity, Coriolis effect, spin drift. To do it with iron sights was masterful. To even consider the ricochet shot was insanity. Elena's finger tightened on the trigger. There was no hesitation, no last-second adjustment. Just a smooth, inexorable squeeze. Crack. The rifle's report was sharp and clean, a single, definitive statement. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, a sound rolled back across the range, a sound that defied logic. Ping. The first plate rang, the bullet striking its extreme left edge with surgical precision. But instead of ricocheting wildly, the bullet seemed to transform. A high-speed camera would have shown it striking the hardened steel at such a specific angle that it was swatted, not flattened, sent spinning on a new, controlled trajectory. Pieing. The sound came a heartbeat later, higher in pitch. The bullet, now traveling sideways but still impossibly stable, had crossed the gap and slammed into the face of the second, angled plate. The impact corrected its spin, kicking it back across the range like a billiard ball off a cushion. Pieing. The final impact was the loudest, a triumphant, resonant clang that echoed off the canyon walls. The third plate shuddered violently. 3 targets. 1 bullet. 1 echo that carried 3 distinct notes of impossibility. Silence descended upon the range. It was a heavy, profound silence, broken only by the fading echo and the ceaseless Nevada wind. Caleb Jensen's jaw hung open. The other recruits were frozen, their faces masks of disbelief. The young lieutenant who had challenged Elena dropped his walkie-talkie. It hit the concrete with a clatter that made everyone jump. Even the grizzled, seen-it-all range safety officer, a man who had witnessed decades of marksmanship, slowly took off his hat and wiped his brow, his eyes wide with confusion. The tension broke when the lieutenant, his voice cracking, barked into his recovered radio. Range is cold. Cease all activity. Civilian on deck, I repeat, civilian on deck. He turned to Elena, his face pale. Ma'am, you need to leave. Now. This is a restricted area. Your pass is for observation, not participation. He was flustered, trying to reassert an authority that had been utterly vaporized. Elena didn't argue. She didn't demand recognition or offer an explanation. The predatory focus in her eyes softened, replaced once again by that tired, vacant look. She stood, methodically cleared the M21's chamber, and began wrapping it back in its canvas shroud. She gave the officer a simple, almost apologetic nod, turned, and walked back towards her rusty Ford Ranger. Her silence was more unnerving than any boast. It was the silence of someone who didn't need to explain the impossible because, to them, it wasn't. As her truck coughed back to life and rattled away, Caleb stared at the 3 ringing targets, the impossible echoes still playing in his mind. That wasn't a trick shot. It was a message. And he was the only one who seemed desperate to understand it. The shot haunted Caleb for the rest of the day. It gnawed at him through evening drills, through dinner in the mess hall, through the mindless barracks chatter. Luck. A 1 in a billion fluke. His gut, the same instinct that made him the top recruit, screamed otherwise. That shot wasn't luck. It was architecture. His hunt began that night in the base's digital archives. His first stop was the range's high-speed camera footage. The system was designed for ballistic analysis, capturing 10,000 frames per second. He found the clip from her lane, isolated the moment of the shot, and slowed it down to a crawl. What he saw made the hairs on his arms stand up. On the screen, the bullet wasn't just bouncing. It was shaping its path. The first impact on the plate's edge was a controlled interaction, a violent handshake that altered its vector with minimal energy loss. The second impact was even more bizarre. The bullet seemed to almost bite into the steel, using the collision to pivot. It was less like a ricochet and more like a parkour artist vaulting over an obstacle. It was deliberate. It was designed. The next morning, he approached his drill instructor, Sergeant Miller, a tough, by-the-book veteran with 20 years of service. "Sarge," Caleb began, trying to sound casual. "Have you ever heard of ricochet ballistics being used, tactically? Like, chaining targets?" Miller took a long sip of his coffee and snorted. "Jensen, you've been reading too many comic books. That's physics-defying nonsense. Battlefield ghost stories grunts tell to scare the new guys. Forget about it and focus on your breathing exercises." The dismissal was exactly what Caleb expected, and it only fueled his obsession. If the official channels were a dead end, he'd have to go unofficial. Caleb was a digital native. Before enlisting, he'd spent his teenage years navigating the labyrinthine depths of the internet. That night, he bypassed the standard network protocols in the rec room and slipped into the base's older, less secure archival server, a digital attic where old reports and decommissioned project files went to die. He didn't know the woman's name, so he started with keywords from the drill sergeant's insult. Ghost. Ricochet. Impossible shot. Most searches yielded nothing. But when he combined non-conventional ballistics with M21 rifle, he got a hit. It was a single, fragmented file from the early 2000s, buried in a folder for a decommissioned task force. The project name was Project Chimera. The file was heavily redacted, black bars obscuring most of the text, but a few phrases shone through the darkness like beacons. Operative demonstrated impossible shot placement under extreme duress. Unorthodox trajectory analysis defies conventional modeling. Recommend further study of Viper technique. Viper. A code name. His heart hammered against his ribs. He cross-referenced Project Chimera and Viper with personnel files from that era. The search took almost an hour, the server grinding slowly through terabytes of old data. Finally, a single, corrupted profile loaded on his screen. It was an army service photo. The image was grainy, black and white, but the face was unmistakable. It was her. 20 years younger, her features sharper, her eyes burning with an intensity that transcended the poor image quality. She was leaning against an M21 rifle, the same rifle. He scrolled down, his own breathing catching in his throat. Name, Rivas, Elena. Rank, Lieutenant Colonel. Unit, redacted. Specialty, Asymmetric threat neutralization. Status, Kia. Operation Desert Serpent. 2005. Killed in action. Caleb stared at the screen, the glow of the monitor illuminating his pale face. The official record said she was dead. A hero, killed in action 2 decades ago. But he had seen her. He had watched her perform a miracle and then drive away in a rusty pickup truck. This wasn't just a retired soldier. This was a ghost, walking in the daylight. And he had just stumbled upon her grave. 2 days later, the base commander, a stern colonel named Hayes, received a flash message from the Pentagon. It arrived via a dedicated, encrypted channel, bypassing the usual chain of command. The message was short, authoritative, and utterly bewildering. It confirmed that a civilian, Elena Rivas, had been granted temporary access. It then identified her as the former commander of a special operations unit, codenamed Viper, and a leading expert in a field so classified it was only referred to by a string of numbers. The final line was an order: provide Lieutenant Colonel Rivas, RET, with any and all resources required for a technical demonstration. Full base assembly. Utmost courtesy is expected. Eyes only. The next morning, the entire population of Fort Holloway, from the rawest recruits to the most seasoned instructors, was assembled on the main parade ground. The mood was a cocktail of confusion and rumor. Whispers about the ghost shooter had spread like wildfire. Then, she appeared. Escorted by Colonel Hayes himself, Elena Rivas walked towards the podium. She was wearing the same faded hoodie and jeans. She carried the same canvas-wrapped rifle. But this time, no one was laughing. The assembled soldiers watched her with a mixture of awe and apprehension, a crowd of professionals suddenly realizing they were in the presence of a master. A new demonstration area had been set up. It was a mock-up of a hostage situation, a sedan parked in front of a concrete wall, with 2 mannequins inside the car and a third, target, mannequin positioned behind the driver's side door, visible only through the car's windows. "We wanted to present a scenario," Colonel Hayes announced, his voice booming over the PA system. "A high-value target is shielded, with a civilian hostage in the passenger seat. A direct shot is impossible." Elena stepped forward, her M21 now unwrapped. She surveyed the scene for a long moment, her eyes calculating angles the way a mathematician solves an equation. She didn't take a standard prone or kneeling position. She took 2 steps to her right, a seemingly minor adjustment that shifted her angle to the concrete wall behind the car. She fired. The shot was deafening in the expectant silence. The bullet did not hit the car. It struck the concrete wall a full 10 feet to the left of the vehicle, at a sharp, shallow angle. It screamed off the concrete, a spray of dust marking the impact, and slammed into the car's rear side panel. The metal buckled, and the now-deformed slug deflected inside the car's chassis, ricocheting off the internal frame before exiting through the far side of the driver's door and striking the target mannequin squarely in the chest. The hostage mannequin remained untouched. It was a shot that shouldn't have been possible outside of a computer simulation. A controlled, 3-cushion bank shot with a high-velocity rifle round. As the collective gasp of 500 soldiers subsided, an old man in a civilian suit stepped out from the crowd of VIPs. He was tall and frail, leaning heavily on a cane. His hands trembled as he walked slowly toward Elena. It was retired General Harmon, the man whose signature was on the bottom of Elena's 20-year-old service file. He stopped 3 feet in front of her, his eyes welling with tears. He struggled to straighten his stooped shoulders, drew a shaky breath, and rendered a perfect, textbook salute. "Lieutenant Colonel Rivas," his voice cracked with emotion, thick with the regret of 2 decades. "I am sorry. I signed the orders that buried you. I let you live in this silence. It was the greatest failure of my command. I am so sorry." Elena didn't salute back. She simply reached out and gently lowered his trembling hand. "You did what the mission required, General," she said, her voice steady but filled with a deep, ancient weariness. Project Chimera was designed to be denied. We all knew the stakes. Some ghosts have to stay ghosts to protect the living. Their exchange was quiet, almost private, yet every person on the field felt its weight. This wasn't just a demonstration of skill. It was the resurrection of a legend. Elena Rivas had been a ghost by choice, a sacrifice made to bury secrets too dangerous to see the light of day. And now, she had been called back into the world of the living. In the days following the demonstration, Fort Holloway buzzed with a new energy. The command staff offered Elena everything: a lucrative civilian contractor position, a state-of-the-art lab to analyze her techniques, the title of Master Instructor. She politely refused it all. "My methods were born in places I pray these kids never have to go," she told Colonel Hayes. "You can't teach that in a classroom. It has to be learned in the dirt." But she didn't leave. She started showing up at the range, not as a legend on a pedestal, but as a quiet presence in the background. She'd appear in the early morning, holding a thermos of coffee, and just watch. She never gave lectures, never interrupted the official instructors. She just observed. One afternoon, she found Caleb Jensen on the line, frustration radiating from him in palpable waves. He was practicing a difficult wind shot, and his groupings were scattered, his anger making him jerk the trigger. He was the eagle eye, the hot shot, and he was failing. Elena walked over and stood behind him, silent for a full minute. Caleb was acutely aware of her presence. "You're fighting the wind," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm compensating for a 15-mile-an-hour crosswind, ma'am," he replied, his tone defensive. "Just like the manual says." "The manual is a guide, not a gospel," she countered. "The manual doesn't feel the gust that's about to die, or the updraft from the hot rock over there. You're trying to command the bullet. You should be listening to it." She placed a hand gently on his back, between his shoulder blades. "Breathe," she commanded. "Not with your chest. Deeper. From your belly. Feel the ground beneath you. Now, forget the target. Just feel the rifle. It's a part of you. Let your pulse beat with the wind, not against it." Caleb, the arrogant prodigy, closed his eyes and did as he was told. He breathed deep, slowed his heart, and felt the rifle settle in his arms. He stopped thinking about calculations and formulas. He just felt. He felt the subtle shift in the wind's pressure on his cheek. He felt the rhythm of his own body. "The shot is already made before you pull the trigger," Elena murmured. "The trigger just releases it. Now, release it." Caleb squeezed the trigger. The shot broke with crystalline purity. He looked through his scope and saw the bullet hole punched directly in the center of the distant target. A perfect shot. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding for 5 minutes. When he turned to thank her, she was already walking away, heading towards another young soldier who was struggling. That was how she taught. Not with PowerPoints and doctrine, but with quiet corrections and whispered wisdom. The culture of the sniper school began to shift. The swagger and bravado that Caleb had once embodied started to fade, replaced by a quiet, monastic focus. The recruits stopped competing for the most spectacular shot and started competing for the most consistent, the most patient, the most controlled. They learned that the true measure of a marksman wasn't the ability to hit an easy target, but the humility to master the fundamentals. Caleb Jensen, the eagle eye, became her most devoted, if unofficial, student. He stopped chasing glory and started chasing understanding. The soldiers who once mocked the lost mom now referred to her only by her call sign, spoken with a reverence usually reserved for saints and founding fathers, Viper. She was shaping the next generation, not by teaching them how to be weapons, but by teaching them how to be craftsmen. Then, one Tuesday, she didn't come. Her old Ford Ranger wasn't in the visitor's lot. She wasn't there at dawn, and she wasn't there at dusk. A week went by, then 2. A quiet anxiety settled over the range. The instructors tried to carry on, but her absence left a void, a silence that was heavier than her presence had ever been. It was Caleb who found it. He felt drawn to the shooting lane where she had made the impossible shot, the place where his entire worldview had been shattered and rebuilt. There, resting on the cold stone bench behind the number 3 target position, was a single, folded piece of paper. It wasn't an envelope, it was a page torn from a cheap notebook. Her handwriting was on it, steady and clear. Don't aim to hit the target if you don't know why you're pulling the trigger. That was all. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a final lesson. The next month, by order of Colonel Hayes, a new sign was erected at the entrance to the long-distance range. It read, Viper Canyon 017. Her number, an echo of a ghost unit, now marked the ground she had consecrated with her skill. The effects of her quiet tutelage became undeniable. 6 months later, the graduates of the Fort Holloway Sniper program were posting record-breaking scores at advanced training exercises. A year later, reports trickled back from active duty deployments. Soldiers trained at Holloway were outperforming everyone. They were making shots in treacherous conditions that doctrine said were impossible. When debriefed, they didn't speak of a secret technique. They all said the same thing in different ways: we learned to listen. We learned patience. She taught us that the rifle is only half of the equation. Elena's legend wasn't etched onto a plaque or memorialized in a formal ceremony. Her legacy was alive. It was in the steady hands of a young sniper in a foreign mountain pass, in the calm breathing of a soldier under unimaginable pressure, in the quiet confidence of hundreds of marksmen who now understood that the deadliest weapon is a focused mind. We often mistake silence for absence, and humility for weakness. But the quietest people in the room are often the ones who have fought the hardest battles. The most unassuming figures may be the ones who once shouldered the heaviest burdens. Elena Rivas, the ghost of Viper Canyon, never sought fame or recognition. She didn't need it. Her actions had already spoken, and their echo would keep a generation of soldiers safe. Elena's story reminds us that true strength doesn't need to announce itself. In your own life, have you ever underestimated a quiet guardian? Someone whose competence and strength you only recognized in hindsight. Share your story in the comments below. Let's learn to see the silent strength all around us. Please, comment with respect for every story and every individual's experience. If this story moved you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe for more stories about the extraordinary legends hidden in plain sight. We'll see you in the next one.